they come from outside the building. So thanks for being here. Look, and I'm glad today to be joined by State Treasurer John Leiber, who was one of the Republicans who won in 2022 in this state. For the first time in political history, modern political history, delegates will gather at a major convention in Chicago to nominate a ghost instead of a candidate. Zero news conferences, zero sit-down interviews, zero policies proposed, and zero votes in a Democrat primary or a Democrat caucus. And Kamala Harris is the new nominee of the Democratic Party after they had what amounted to a coup against a sitting president and removed him as the nominee. I mean, think about that historically, how big that is and how significant that is. Kamala Harris won't face the cameras. She won't take questions to explain her flip-flops, her campaign. Instead, they send junior-level staffers out to tell all of you what she expects the campaign to be about. I said to someone the other day, they were asking me about this polling honeymoon that Kamala Harris has been on, and you know, there's a honeymoon. She's the new candidate. She announces her vice president. She's going to her convention. But at some point after the honeymoon, you check out of the hotel and go home. And the truth of the matter is they don't have much to lean on. By the way, Kamala Harris doesn't have two opponents. Let me restart. Kamala Harris doesn't have one opponent this year. She has two. She has Donald Trump, and she also has Joe Biden. The fact of the matter is she has to run against the last 4 years of what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris has done to this country as hard as she has to run against Donald Trump. Every major poll out there and every minor poll out there shows that people feel as though things are upside down in this country on every major issue, whether it's inflation or war or the border or crime or prices at the grocery store. On every one of those and more, people feel as though it's upside down in this country. It's upside down because of the Biden-Harris administration. That's why Joe Biden isn't at the top of the ticket, because he was going to take them down to a loss to Donald Trump. It's not even a question. Every poll shows it. So it gets back to Ronald Reagan's old question. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And overwhelmingly in every poll, people say they are not. That's why she has to run against Joe Biden as well as Donald Trump. She is associated with all the failures of this administration. She loses the election. It's that simple, and the Harris people understand this. So at this point, enough is enough. Zeros don't cut it anymore. Zero press conferences, zero sit-downs, zero explanations. All the showy stuff doesn't count anymore because we're now 82 days out from an election that will decide America's future. So I'm not surprised at the way she's done that. It is a Joe Biden basement strategy right now to keep her away from answering any potential questions that she might have to answer. Literally, there's been like 71 seconds, I think it was, on a tarmac where she actually was close to the media and had to answer any questions, and that's almost after a month of the presumptive nominee. So she can't take the scrutiny, and that goes not only for her, but for Tim Walz as well. A couple nights ago, I was with the House Majority Whip from Minnesota, Tom Emmer, and so he's got experience because of his knowledge of Minnesota. And I kind of asked him, I said, presumably, I mean, I've been saying all along that Walz was a defensive pick, that the Democrats were going back to their blue wall strategy of trying to put the bricks together in the old blue wall, right? They stayed away from a perceived moderate in Pennsylvania because their internal politics couldn't handle that, and they feel as though they're going to lose Pennsylvania. So they go back to the old blue wall with Tim Walz as part of that, and which I welcome. Frankly, I welcome the opportunity to contrast against probably the most liberal ticket in history. So I'll be interested to see what goes on next week. But the fact that she has to run against two people and not one, I think, is a significant advantage to us. I'll turn it over to the State Treasurer.
Sure. Hi, I'm State Treasurer John Leiber. So public officials run for office because they believe in public service, and it's the right thing to do. We don't run for fun, we're not running for vibes or anything like that. And we don't talk to the press because we're having fun doing it, well, some might. But we do it because it's the right thing to do, and it's part of our responsibility. It's part of our job to get our message out to the voters, to the people, and explain what we do and why we believe what we believe and what we're going to do about it. So that's why it's concerning to me. It doesn't seem like Kamala Harris and Governor Walz understand the responsibilities and are getting out there and talking to the media. They don't seem to understand the issues that are really affecting Wisconsinites, or at least they haven't explained that they do. So you can ask voters in Wisconsin and residents of Whitewater that their local officials had to request aid for 1,000 migrants moving into the city over the last couple of years. You can ask the residents of Madison or Milwaukee about the ever-increasing prices of rent. I was a renter myself years ago, and I don't know if I could afford to live in one of these cities now with the huge increases. You can ask the residents of Green Bay or La Crosse or Kenosha about the increasing cost of energy prices going up 30%, the cost of groceries going up 20%. Feels like more, honestly, but those are the stats. And you look at each of those issues and each of those people affected by those issues, and they all have their stories to tell on how the current environment in this country is affecting them. And it's disappointing because you can see in the polling numbers, the results. They're asking surveys. People believe the country's going in the wrong direction. And we have not had any answer from the Harris campaign on what their plans are to change that. Is this just going to be another second term for Biden? People want to know. And I think it's important that candidates, elected officials, get in front of the media and explain and take the tough questions. I'm the state treasurer of Wisconsin. Not exactly a high-profile race, not something that's really in the news very much. But if I'm able to stand up here in front of the media, take questions, answer questions, then I would hope that somebody running for the highest office in the country is able to do the same thing. So with that, turn back to Brian.
Questions?
The state treasurer has now answered as many questions as a major party presidential candidate. So, go ahead.
You mentioned the economy as a huge issue for a lot of voters. Just wondering if you support the provision in the Inflation Reduction Act that would allow Medicare to negotiate prices with prescription drug companies over the prices of their drugs.
Well, I think Republicans have always. Sorry,
Thank you. No, it's all good.
I think Republicans are always interested in less, prescription drug prices without commenting on that. But it gets to an issue about why now? Where has this administration been? I mean, they're out there talking about things, Vice President Harris, that the things they want to do for how they're going to do this and that and the next thing. On day one for Kamala Harris was 3.5 years ago, in January of 2021. Where have they been on the big issues that face us? And they don't seem to want to answer that question. Sorry.
So Tuesday's primary, we saw constitutional amendment votes fail. A lot of people kind of view that as a Democratic victory. We've also seen polling showing Democratic enthusiasm seems to have kind of matched where Republican enthusiasm had been going into November. Just kind of your thoughts on that. How's the party kind of counter some of that as we get closer to November?
Yeah, with respect to Democrat enthusiasm, you got to remember how far they started back. And so there's another survey out today, and I forget what it was, but there's another survey out today talking about how 70% of Democrat and independent voters don't know where Kamala Harris is on the big issues. And hence it gets to what we're facing right now is she has to avoid the 4 years, 3.5 years of the Biden term, answering for that term, but she also has to be so careful about what she's going to do going forward. And that's her honestly, that's her problem, is that every survey out there shows on every major issue the Democrats are upside down. So she has to pull off the political trick of getting away from the record that she helped build the last 3.5 years, which is, and I will tell you, having done statewide campaigns and a lot of local campaigns, when you have to run against yourself, it's a problem. When you're part of the record that you have to now run against and say, oh, I'm going to do something about this, that, and the other thing, that's all fine, but where have you been the last 3.5 years? What the people of this country know about the last 3.5 years of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden is not a pretty picture, and they were prepared to vote against it. So I would say, with respect to those kinds of issues, or all issues for that matter, if people identify Kamala Harris with the failures of the Biden administration, this election's over. So she has to avoid being associated with Joe Biden. With respect, your first question, actually, with respect to the referendum Tuesday night, I do. First of all, we had encouraged the yes vote. We had a lot of folks, people. I was endorsing a yes vote, things like that. But we didn't put effort into that vote in terms of advertising. I was saying to someone yesterday, I got 82 days to go. So the focus of the Republican Party of Wisconsin is to elect Republicans and to do what it takes to get Republicans over the finish line. I'm not the referendum party of Wisconsin. I'm the Republican Party of Wisconsin. And so the follow-up question I had yesterday is, well, folks got involved, which we did, last April in the Zuckerbucks thing. But the Zuckerbucks issues, both of them, as you recall, the two Zuckerbucks referendum were directly affecting election administration in this state. So we were involved with that because we are concerned it would affect how elections over 1,850 municipalities across the state hold their elections. So there we got involved because it was something that was important to our core mission. I would add, too, in Tuesday, I'm not hearing from some of the people. I was hearing about everybody about Tuesday night on two referendums that didn't have to deal with Republicans specifically. I didn't hear from those same people in April when we won both the Zuckerbucks referendums. We knocked off rising Democrat star, the mayor of Wausau, where we won dozens of local elections. So sometimes the people who talk about that are not remembering what's happened when we are in the game.
At the DNC, I expect we're going to hear a lot from organized labor, union leaders about how much they love the Harris-Walz ticket. There was a bit of a twist to the RNC where you had the Teamsters president get up there and talk about his affinity for President Trump.
Yeah, I was sitting in the front row for that one.
Do you think that the party in Wisconsin is making inroads with union members in a way that historically there's maybe been a little more antagonism there? Do you think there's been progress on that front?
Yeah, I think so. And part of the reason for that, by the way, in fact, we were just talking about this morning, part of the reason that we are making inroads, not only with unions, but with working people clear across the employment spectrum, is they're suffering. I mean, you put up with a cumulative 20% inflation over the 3.5 years of this administration. I mean, people in the trades and people who, like a lot of hundreds of thousands of people in Wisconsin who work for a living, the economy has to be doing pretty well. We have a record number of people who are living paycheck to paycheck right now. You have record amounts of consumer debt right now. You have record amounts of people who say that if they were to lose their job for a month, even a month, they wouldn't be able to pay their bills. So that directly affects working people clear across the state of all shapes and sizes, all political demographics. That is a massive opportunity for Republicans in this state because the Democrats have failed them. So they, I was interested this week because you had the new CPI and you had some of the statistics out this week. And I always kind of say there's a grocery store test. That when people, turn on the TV and see the big news conference about what the CPI is or what the inflation rate or interest rate, things like that, and they get told by government agencies and by the Biden administration that everything's on the rebound. Well, then they get in the car and they go by the Quick Trip and see what gas prices are on the way to the grocery store, where they get whacked because they're paying $50 more than they were, or $100 more than they were a year ago now. For the same amount of groceries, or they've scaled back from where they were a year from now. So what the Democrats don't seem to get, for whatever reason, for what the Democrats don't seem to get, is they can put out all the government reports they want, but at some point they hit the grocery store test, and that's what's hurting them right now. That's why you see the polling that you see now about people being upside down and all these things. Kamala Harris has gotten away with it so far because folks haven't, people don't really know what her record is, either as vice president or as a member of the U.S. Senate, and that's a problem that's going to get solved.
The vice president's making a trip here back to Wisconsin on Tuesday. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and as you know, Senator Vance is here in Milwaukee tomorrow at the Milwaukee Police Association. They'll be here next week. Look, I like the tourism, being a native Wisconsinite. I like the tourism that presidential visits or campaign visits bring. But I will tell you, I welcome them coming here because it gives us a greater opportunity to contrast what's actually happening in cities like Milwaukee, in cities like Green Bay, Wausau, La Crosse, Eau Claire, places that John and I have both been, dozens and dozens of times. So I welcome the opportunity for them to come here and contrast against them. The real question will be is will they come to town? So I guess they're breaking off of the Democratic convention and scoot up here to do the event. So my only question will be is it more showmanship on the part of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, or are they actually going to take some questions? Because the vice president right now hasn't taken a single question, and she's been the nominee for a month.
Is there anything you'd like to hear from J.D. Vance tomorrow?
I'm sorry.
During his visit tomorrow, is there anything you're looking for J.D. Vance to talk about,
Right.
especially for Wisconsin?
Yeah, I think it seems the theme of the trip for Senator Vance tomorrow is talk about crime in bigger cities and what the real numbers are there. But I'm sure he'll be talking about the economy as well and the challenges that the people... The number one issue in Wisconsin, by far, is the economy. It's like in the 38%, something like that. The number one issue in Wisconsin is the economy, immigration, as the state treasurer mentioned. Another big issue for cities all across the state, including Whitewater, and I'm a former Whitewater City Council member, so I'm quite aware of the effect that would have on a town that size. So we're happy to talk about the kitchen table issues that they are now avoiding. We will take any opportunity to contrast against them. So if they want to come back, I'd be glad to submit questions anyone wants to ask for. But I think that will be the question facing, folks in the media is it going to be all show? I mean, you expect the convention to be showmanship, okay? Let's be honest. But their visits to Wisconsin, at some point, it would be nice if the people of this state would get some answers, because right now she's providing none, and that's a strategy. It's not accidental. They're avoiding questions because the cost of answering questions is much worse, much worse.
Well, and I'll just say, as a Wisconsin elected official, I'm always glad that when campaigns talk about issues that matter to Wisconsinites. That's why the Republicans held their national convention here in Milwaukee, to show that they actually care about the issues of our state. And Democrats are in Chicago. I hope somebody told them that they're not the same thing. We're a little different than Illinois, and all the Midwest can't be grouped together. So it's no surprise that suddenly they're making another trip up to Wisconsin during their convention, because Wisconsin really is one of the most important states in the country right now as far as the Electoral College goes. So I think the campaign that pays the least amount of attention to Wisconsin is the one that's going to lose Wisconsin. So it's no surprise that we're going to see a lot of attention over the coming months. And I think that's great for Wisconsinites, because that means the rest of the country gets to find out what's important to Wisconsinites, what impacts our lives, and that attention is only good for the citizens of Wisconsin.
I was on the phone. I had a call yesterday or 2 days ago with the state chairman in Michigan, and he, Pete Hoekstra, who's a former Michigan congressman, Pete Hoekstra, and we were talking about the commonality of a lot of the economic issues across the upper Midwest, like Michigan, where they have a huge, Pete was talking about how it's EVs and the whole issue about energy is obviously huge in Michigan. Frankly, it's also huge in Pennsylvania because of fracking and because of that is an energy-driven economic economy there in Pennsylvania. But I would argue that too for Wisconsin and for Minnesota, for that matter. I had someone tell me the other day that we were talking about Minnesota politics, and there's a lot of talk about the similarities, I guess, was the suggestion between Wisconsin and Minnesota. Tim Walz lost his own old congressional district in his last gubernatorial race. I mean, Tim Walz essentially has the cities and some of the suburban counties around Michigan, but he didn't win some big landslide in his reelection as governor. So I think Minnesota is figuring Tim Walz out. And I said, and as many of you know, you get up in western and northwestern Wisconsin, much to the west of Menominee, and almost all the television is out of the Twin Cities. And so the Democrats think that's going to be an advantage. But the folks I talked to up there, in fact, I'll be up there next week, at some campaign stops next week. The folks I talked up to, they remember Tim Walz as governor, and most of the video they remember of are buildings burning down and protesters and all of that. So if Tim Walz wants to try to run away from that in next door neighbor Wisconsin, good luck.
Any more questions?
Just kind of a quick one. How does the state party plan on addressing maybe one of the biggest challenges you guys have in Wisconsin is the Dane County Democratic vote and just the numbers that they can put up when you're talking statewide elections?
Yeah. So and I always shock people when I go across the state because I tell them I actually am a Republican from Madison. I grew up right next to Camp Randall, and my parents were both at the university, and so when I tell folks I'm a Republican from Madison, they can't believe it. But the great thing about Madison is, and this may sound like a criticism of my own party, and if it sounds that way, it probably is that way. That is, I think the party needs to spend more time in Madison and Dane County and do an outreach to areas that maybe we gave up on for a while. Well, you need to get back in there. Not like anything else in life. If you only show up every 4 years, you're not going to have people pay attention. I know the Dane County's party has been very active, will be active. We're active on the campuses. But I say this with respect to Madison, but also to Milwaukee. We've just opened last week a new Hispanic outreach center on the south side. And school choice and other issues that are ones that are commonly associated with Republicans are important to people on the south side in Milwaukee and frankly now across the state as well. So I think it's Madison simply because we're at probably a historic low here, but you gotta be there. I believe as state party chairman, and I've said this well before I was chairman, you gotta be out there and you gotta have the outreach and not just opening the door every 2 years. So to me, that's a permanent project, and we're going to do it.
Quick thing about that. So running a statewide campaign, obviously I have to campaign everywhere, and I also am a Dane County resident. And I think it's easy for people running for office outstate to campaign against Madison. They're way out. They're over there. They're different. And I think sometimes, we kind of forget that there's a lot of votes here, and there's a lot of people that agree with us in Dane County as Republicans. I think Dane County is the third highest number of Republican votes in Wisconsin for Republicans. So that's a huge number, and I think it's a mistake if Republicans don't get out in Dane County, in Madison, and talk to people. Doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with us, but just explain where we're at, because if we're not talking to people, they have no idea what we stand for or what we believe. And I think if we do that, we're going to find a lot of people actually agree with some of our policy proposals, some of our issues. Now, maybe not a majority, but it doesn't need to be a majority everywhere. But I think there are a lot of Republicans or potential Republicans in Dane County that we can work on.
Any more questions? All righty. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.